So obviously NXT this week had their first show in the new Tuesday night time slot on the USA Network, and pretty much as expected, they had very good viewership, very good ratings, especially for what they were previously doing in the Wednesday night time slot opposite AEW Dynamite. WWE NXT has garnered its best audience of the year with the move to the new Tuesday night time slot. Now, Tuesday's live post-takeover edition of WWE NXT on the USA Network drew 805,000 viewers on the USA Network. This is according to Nielsen via Showbuzz Daily. Now, it should be noted that this was the first NXT episode to air on Tuesday nights with no head-to-head competition from AEW Dynamite. This show featured the fallout from last week's two-night takeover, stand and deliver event. This viewership is up 4.82% from last week's show, which drew 768,000 viewers for Takeover Night 1. Episode that also aired on Peacock / the WWE Network with no commercials and up against AEW Dynamite. NXT tied number 8 for the cable top 150 this week with a 0.22 rating in the key 18 to 49 demographic. This is in line with last week's final Wednesday show, which ranked 11th with a 0.22 rating in the key demo. This week's NXT show ranks 60 in viewership, tying with Assembly Required and the 9 a.m. airing of CNN Newsroom. This is down from last week's 59 ranking. I say down, it's essentially average, essentially flat rather. This is NXT's biggest audience since October 28, which was the Halloween Havoc show that drew 876,000 viewers with a 0.25 rating in the 18 to 49 demographic. This week's show tied with last week's NXT for the biggest key demo rating since Halloween Havoc. This week's NXT viewership was up 16% from the same week in 2020, while this week's key demographic was up 29.4% from the same week in 2022. So it was a success. It was a success. Now, obviously, the proof in the pudding, as it will, is going to be if this continues. If this continues in the next couple of weeks, if this carries on, which, to be honest, I mean, I don't see why it wouldn't. Now, obviously, there was a lot going on this week that was probably worth tuning in for. Obviously, you had all of the fallout from the two-night Takeover Stand and Deliver show, so that was obviously worth tuning in for. And also, look, you had a bigger audience. You had a bigger audience that wasn't going to be divided by airing opposite AEW Dynamite. So I don't know if this is going to be the average. I don't know if this is going to be the norm. I don't know if 805,000 live viewers on the USA Network on a Tuesday night is going to be the norm for NXT. Look, if it is, considering what they had been doing previously in competition with AEW Dynamite, they'll be very happy with it. They will be very, very happy with it. Why wouldn't they? You know, previously, I know, and this is worth stressing actually, I know in recent months NXT has actually been doing, I think, a bit better in terms of the viewership. They still haven't been beating AEW Dynamite in viewership or the demographic. Of course, last week when it comes to viewership, they did. They were expected to. If they didn't last week with a takeover event, I think big questions would have been asked. But the fact that they beat AEW Dynamite last week and this week they've now improved on that number as well, that's pretty significant. They'll be happy with that. They'll be very, very happy with that. So again, I don't know if this is the norm going forward, and I know people are a bit like, stop it with the ratings, stop it with the viewership. The good thing with the Wednesday Night Wars ending, the good thing with NXT moving to Tuesdays, and the good thing with AEW Dynamite sticking to Wednesdays is that we no longer have to pay attention to ratings. Well, like I said when the announcement was made, the focus on the ratings and the focus on the viewership, that isn't going to change at least for the next month or so, because people are interested in the same way that people were interested in seeing how is AEW going to do in competition to NXT, or how is NXT going to do in competition with AEW in the same time slot. People are now going to be interested to see how they do without the competition. Of course, we really know the answer. We know the answer here. The answer is that they're both shows are going to thrive. Both shows are going to do better. You would at least hope so, and I think that's going to be the case. I think obviously Dynamite was last night. We'll get the ratings later on today, but in the same way that NXT benefits from not having to go up against Dynamite will benefit from not having to go up against NXT. Why? Because we found out, didn't we? We found out the answer to the question that previously in the late 1990s with the Monday Night Wars, with WWE Monday Night Raw and with WCW Monday Nitro, despite having two wrestling shows on at the same time, on the same day, in the same time slot, it actually brought more viewers in. It brought viewers in that weren't watching wrestling because the quality was raised and it got so high. People thought that might be the same case in 2019, 2020, and 2021, having two wrestling shows on at the same time on a Wednesday night between 8 p.m. and 10 p.m. Eastern time. They thought that would be the same thing. There would be an initial pool of viewers and then they would come in. they found out in actuality that 1.5 million viewers, roughly, would be watching wrestling on a Wednesday night. And if you've got 2 shows, it just cuts that in half, or maybe like 3/4 and a quarter, whatever way you want to slice it. It just cuts them in 2. That's what it does. And it didn't bring in really any new viewers overall in terms of expanding that audience, because it was roughly the same size when it started and when it ended. So I think people realized actually it wasn't best for business. If anything, it probably hurt the viewership base for both shows. And with them being on separate nights, the proof was in the pudding when it came to the short experiment, if you will, when NXT was on Tuesdays for 2 weeks in a row last year with those Super Tuesday shows. They had a bigger audience, and Dynamite had a bigger audience, as you expect, because the viewership base, which is 1.5 million viewers roughly overall, they weren't forced to choose. Now, what obviously is interesting, is that obviously last week's NXT TakeOver Stand and Deliver Night 1 show drew 768,000 live viewers on the USA Network. Again, we don't know that number, and it must be pointed out here, we don't know what the overall number is because we don't know the viewership number on Peacock. The viewership number on Peacock might be 500,000, 600,000. It might be 100,000. We don't know. The thing that is interesting, I suppose, is that for whatever reason, on cable, at least last week, and again, maybe this is isn't the best way to look at it, because again, I do think you're kind of ignoring the Peacock numbers, the WWE Network numbers there. Nevertheless, last week's show drew 768,000 live viewers on the USA Network, and this week 805. So you could say, what, did only 70,000 so decide to tune into NXT this week that didn't last week? Is that them coming over from Peacock? Is that them coming over from the WWE Network? Or is that them coming over from TNT for AEW, from AEW Dynamite? We don't know. They are hypotheticals at that point, but hopefully this continues. And it's going to be interesting. We'll do the same video tomorrow talking about the AEW Dynamite ratings, because I know, again, they'll be very, very interesting. And again, I know people were a bit like, can we stop it with the ratings? Can we stop it with comparing the two? And it will stop. And at least the hard comparison between NXT losing or AEW beating NXT or whatever, that will end pretty quickly. And to be honest, I hope it does. I hope the AEW ratings don't come out tonight and people still consider it like a loss to NXT or a loss to AEW, whatever, because they're no longer in competition. The competition has ended. If you're going to compare AEW to anyone, you should compare them to every single WWE program at this point, because it's just as valid. It is just as valid. NXT airs on a Tuesday, Raw airs on a Monday, SmackDown airs on a Friday. If you're going to compare AEW, you should compare them to Raw, because they're no longer in competition. But people are going to be interested. Because they want to see the effect of having no competition. So it is going to be certainly interesting. And as I mentioned, it will certainly be discussed for probably the next month or so. I think probably the next month or so, or the next couple of weeks. People will be interested to see what happens. Again, when it comes to NXT this week, you do have to factor in a few things. As I mentioned, it's a post-takeover episode anyway, so people are going to be more interested than usual. It's a post-WrestleMania edition as well. It's the first show in the new time slot on the new date. People are going to be interested. Give it 2 or 3 weeks. That is probably the most accurate number. In about 2 or 3 weeks' time, where the shine of TakeOver and the shine of WrestleMania and the shine of the new time slot, when that's all worn off, that's really the time which you can say, okay, this is how many viewers are really watching NXT every single week. So again, we'll have to wait and see if that improves or doesn't improve. I think it will. Logically, it makes sense that they will, but who knows? I've been saying before that I think the AEW Dynamite and the NXT viewership base is different. I do think they have separate viewers. Of course, there are people that go across, but I think largely, and the proof is in the demographic, NXT has an older audience and Dynamite has a younger audience. You can see it in the demographic. So that's going to be interesting. It's going to be interesting, and as I mentioned, we'll do a video talking about the Dynamite ratings when they come out today. We'll probably do that tomorrow. But WWE, of course, they've been touting this rating success of NXT on Tuesday nights. This is what WWE had to say in a press release, quote, "On the heels of last week's NXT TakeOver Stand and Deliver, which was the most watched NXT TakeOver in history," point there, of course it is. It's over 2 nights. I think they're adding together their viewership base. It should be, to be honest. If you've got 2 separate shows and you're adding together that viewership, of course it should be the most watched NXT TakeOver in history. So bit of a bit of a manipulation of facts and figures there. Nevertheless, they say, quote, NXT made its Tuesday night premiere on the USA Network with impressive results across TV and social media. NXT was up 16% year on year and had more viewers than the NBA game on TNT and the NHL game on NBC SN, which I guess is the sports channel, in both P2 Plus and the 18 to 49 demographic. On social media, NXT was the most social national TV show in prime time. NXT takes place every Tuesday night at 8/7 Central on the USA Network, live from the Capitol Wrestling Center in Orlando. All new episodes are available on demand in the United States exclusively on Peacock the day after it's airing on USA. So they seem relatively happy, or at least that's what they're trying to tell us, that they're happy. I think, to be honest, the fact that your new episode post takeover does more than the takeover on the USA Network, they'll be happy with that. And I think the best way to look at it as well is this has to be a building block. They can't be happy with that as their ceiling. They should be looking at it now. And I know Triple H has tried to say in all of these media calls that now the focus isn't as much on the rating, it's on the quality of content, and they can focus on their stories, and that allows them to maybe improve the ratings if they can tell better stories and all that kind of stuff. They'll keep an eye on the ratings because USA Network will want them to keep an eye on the ratings. I think they should look at that and use it as a building block and say, look, we had around 800,000 people sample our product on a Tuesday, unopposed. Let's try and get 1 million. Why isn't 1 million miles? 1 million isn't a million miles off that. AEW Dynamite's done 1 million unopposed on a Wednesday. Why can't NXT do that on a Tuesday? And if they get to that 1 million mark, they'll be very, very, very happy. Because as far as I'm aware, I don't know if they have at this point. I think maybe on their debut. Maybe you can let me know in the comment section below. But I don't know. So that's got to be the next. That's got to be the next thing. But the issue is that constantly with AEW, they're building a roster, and their talent's going to be there for a while, and every so often NXT has to bring in new stars, because once the star gets over and the star becomes a draw, so if you've got someone on your roster, or you make someone on the NXT roster that can bring in 1.2 million live viewers, you can't tell me that he won't go to Raw, or he or she won't go to Raw or SmackDown immediately, because they will, because WWE will look at that and say, we could use that viewership, especially on Raw. So it's always going to be difficult for them. But that's the NXT model, unfortunately. That's the WWE model. Now, speaking of the ratings as well, and speaking of NXT and AEW, I did want to bring this up because this is just peak Chris Jericho. Chris Jericho spoke about driving NXT, quote, screaming and yelling away from Wednesdays. Now, AEW wrestler Chris Jericho was interviewed by Alfred Conower of Forbes to talk about the end of the Wednesday Night Wars. Jericho believes it was AEW sticking to their vision and not worrying about NXT that ultimately led AEW Dynamite to emerging victorious. He said, quote, we've never really worried about what NXT was doing. I know WWE NXT was watching our stuff during their show, but this is not a war that we were ever asking for. We were kind of thrust into this by proxy. The reason why we won it, and won it so handedly, is we never worried about anybody, what anybody else was doing. We just worried about our own show. Of course, we're competitive. Yes, we wanted to beat NXT. We wanted to drive them screaming and yelling away from Wednesdays, and we did that. Now, it's interesting what Jericho says there, because again, he is right in the fact that AEW Dynamite, they didn't want the war, because they weren't ever meant to be on Wednesdays. They were going to be on Tuesday night. They were going to be on Tuesday Night Dynamite. AEW trademarked that term, and then obviously, as WWE mentioned in the press release, TNT said, well, we've got the NBA. You can't go on Tuesday nights because we've got the NBA. So then they realized, okay, Dynamite's going to have to go on Wednesday. So that's how the war started there. It wasn't anything like AEW Dynamite trying to kick NXT out of the time slot or anything like that, like Triple H has mentioned a couple of times. That's ludicrous. That's not true. I don't know. Again, the idea that AEW won the war because they stuck to their vision and they stuck to what they're doing and all that kind of stuff, it's a difficult one for me to really agree with what he says there, because there are a couple of things. Ultimately, the reason that WWE decided to move out of the Wednesday night time slot maybe had a little bit to do with AEW, because they were losing every week, and Vince McMahon's got a big ego, and of course he hates losing. He hates losing. So that is maybe partially true. I think another thing worth considering is that obviously NBC are negotiating for the NHL, and if that happens, I don't even know because I'm not an NHL fan, but that would go on Wednesday. So that's another factor there as well. So obviously the competition, obviously the NHL, that's another thing. But AEW beat NXT, and I've said this over and over again because it should. It should. And I know people will try and frame it as, well, AEW is this young company. It's only just begun, and it's only been around, a couple of years. And WWE is this big established company that's been around for, 60, 70, 80 years, or however long it's been around, since the dawn of time, if you will, right when Vince McMahon was born. And people will say, well, AEW, they beat this big established company. Well, kind of, but not really. NXT is not Raw or SmackDown. That's not a brand that's been around for years and years. I know it's been around since like 2012 or 2010, whenever it was on Sci-Fi and it was a game show. But this version of NXT hasn't been around forever. It's still a relatively new brand. I know obviously AEW Dynamite and AEW is younger, but that's a point worth considering. Also, you have to remember that NXT came onto the cable at the same time that AEW did as well. So in terms of the wider scope of people actually being able to sample the product, they've kind of been around for a similar amount of time. That's something worth considering as well. But also, the main point why AEW defeated NXT most weeks is because, as I mentioned, they should. If you line it up, person for person, in terms of the talent roster that AEW has on Dynamite, of course they should be NXT. Of course they should be NXT every single week. Look at the stars that they have. They've got Jericho, they've got Omega, they've got Cody Rhodes, they've got Jon Moxley. They've got the Young Bucks, the list goes. They've got Rusev, Miro, whatever you want to call them. They've got all of these big names. Of course, they should be NXT. And the way you can always justify it as is if Chris Jericho re-signed with WWE tomorrow, he's not going to, by the way, but if he did, he wouldn't go on NXT. He would go to SmackDown or Raw because he's Chris Jericho, because he's a big draw. If Jon Moxley re-signed with WWE tomorrow, he wouldn't go to NXT. He would go to SmackDown or Raw. The same with Miro. The same with Kenny Omega. If Kenny Omega signed with WWE, he wouldn't go on NXT. He would go straight to Raw or SmackDown. All of those big names. Sting. You think if Sting re-signed with WWE and got back in the ring, which again isn't going to happen, but you think if he did, you think he'd be making appearances, hanging from the rafters in the Capitol Wrestling Center? Of course he wouldn't. He would go straight to SmackDown probably, or Raw, because he's Sting, because he's a big draw. AEW Dynamite should have always defeated NXT because they have a higher star quality roster. They've got bigger stars. They've got bigger draws. They always should have. If you had, no disrespect to him, but if you had Adam Cole and Keith Lee when he was there and the Undisputed Era and whoever, Karrion Kross, if they were outdrawing AEW Dynamite on a regular basis, you'd be saying, well, these big stars like Chris Jericho, like Sting, like Kenny Omega, like Jon Moxley that are on these big contracts, they're not drawing enough for their value for money. So, of course, AEW Dynamite should have defeated NXT, and I think that's always going to be the case. As I mentioned, if NXT, if they build new stars, they disappear very quickly. Keith Lee became the NXT and North American champion, and he lost it only, a month later, because they knew that he was a big star and he needed to go on the main roster. Now, they've butchered him since, but the point being is that if you become a big star in NXT, you have to go to the main roster quickly because the main roster needs stars. And AEW Dynamite just has bigger stars. They have bigger draws. Yes, I think, in my opinion, with certain aspects of it, they have a better product. They certainly have a different creative process, and it's certainly more loose, and it certainly is more. It does feel more, different and hip, and really what some wrestling fans want. And maybe it taps into what certain wrestling fans want. I don't know. But if you look at it in terms of, Dynamite, they defied the odds. AEW Dynamite defied the odds and defeated NXT. That's just not accurate. Because, to be honest, looking at it, if you really put all the pieces together, the odds were mostly in AEW's favor because they've got, I would argue, probably a bigger budget, and they've certainly got more stars, and they always had that advantage. And don't get me wrong, I don't mean it as a slander to AEW, not by any stretch of the imagination. But I just don't know if the idea that we sent the big bad WWE away kicking and screaming. Don't get me wrong, WWE, they put NXT on the USA Network. I know they were on Wednesdays previously, but they put them on the USA Network to take viewers away from AEW. That was always the plan. That's why they stuck around so long, because they knew, and the proof will be in these ratings in the next few weeks, they knew that if AEW Dynamite runs unopposed on a Wednesday, they can get 1 million viewers easy, because they've done it before. And they don't want that, because once you start hitting 1 million, stuff starts snowballing. Next thing you know, you're not that far off from Monday Night Raw. I think Raw does 1.7 1.8, 1.9. I think this week, was it 2 million because of a post-WrestleMania show? But who's to say? Who's to say in about a couple of years' time, once AEW's more established, they've got more stars, and they've got more brand recognition, who's to say? If Raw keeps going down and AEW keeps going up, they're going to meet somewhere, right? They have to. And WWE knows that. And WWE knows with the amount of money they charge the USA Network, NBC Universal, for Raw, I mean, it's like billions of dollars. They know that if USA Network or NBC Universal, they'll look at Dynamite and say, wait a minute, they're getting close to your ratings and we're paying you loads of money. Suddenly, that television contract or that entity, Monday Night Raw, isn't as valuable as it once was. And WWE knew that. So it was an act of them trying to prevent the competition from rising up and embarrassing them. Not in terms of protecting NXT, but protecting the big franchises in Raw and SmackDown. That's what it was. So the idea of Dynamite defeating NXT is not surprising, and they should have. They should have. But of course, as always, it's just one man's opinion. What are your thoughts on NXT's good ratings for their Tuesday night debut, as well as Chris Jericho's comments about sending NXT screaming and yelling away from Wednesday nights? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I'll do my best to respond and reply to all of your comments. Really enjoy interacting with you guys, talking about WWE, AEW, Impact Wrestling, New Japan Pro Wrestling, all things pro wrestling here on the channel. So be sure to get involved in the community. Drop a comment below. All opinions are welcome. If you have enjoyed this video, please do smash a like on the like button too. Really does help us out here on YouTube, go up the rankings and get into people's recommendation feeds if they haven't seen our videos previously. But most importantly, if you haven't already, please do subscribe to Wrestle News 365. You can do that by clicking the bottom right hand corner of the screen right now, or if you wait a few seconds, there'll be a subscribe button at the end of this video along with another video for you to watch. Thank you very much for watching, listening, streaming, or have you come across this video today, and I'll speak to you again very, very soon.
Hey guys, thank you for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today. Be sure to click on the video on the right there to watch our next video, or click the bottom there to subscribe, or the bottom right hand corner. Thank you very much, and I'll speak to you again very soon.